welcome everyone to the Rogers TV London 2021 federal election debate. This debate is for the London West riding. There are 5 confirmed candidates in alphabetical order. Jacques Boudreau for the Libertarian Party, Rob Flack for the Conservative Party, Arielle Kayabaga for the Liberal Party, Shawna Lewkowitz for the New Democratic Party, and Mike McMullen for the People's Party. I'm your moderator, Bronagh Morgan. You may recall I've been a candidate in the past for the Green Party, but today I am representing Rogers Television, and we are committed to bringing you a fair and unbiased debate so that our viewers can make informed choices on September 20th. As such, all of the questions that I'll be asking today, gathered from our community and from myself, have been vetted by Rogers Television to ensure they are fair and unbiased. Thank you to all the people who have responded to our call for questions. We hope you get answers today. The candidates attending our debate today, again, are Jacques Boudreau, Rob Flack, Arielle Kayabaga, Shawna Lewkowitz, and Mike McMullen. The format for our debate is as follows. Each candidate will be afforded 1 minute to give an opening statement, 1 minute for a closing statement, and 1 minute to respond to each of the questions. If a rebuttal is warranted to a question, they will be given 30 seconds for that rebuttal. Numbers were drawn prior to the beginning of this debate, and so that has determined the order of our opening statements, and we'll be following kind of a rotation of that order throughout the debate. You'll understand when you see it. So let's get started. We have to call on the first person to give their opening statement today, Arielle Kayabaga for the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Bronagh, for inviting us here, and thank you, Aeolian, for hosting this event. Good morning, London, especially London West. My name is Arielle Kayabaga, and I'm your Liberal candidate. My family journey began in this community as a child when my family fled a civil war in Burundi. As a newcomer to Canada, my mom found her first home right off Commissioner's Road in the center of our community. I have seen firsthand the opportunities and challenges that are facing our community, especially as we work to support each other through this unprecedented time. Throughout my time as a London City Councillor, I have always thrived to hear the stories of those who have not always been heard. Now more than ever, we need to hear all Canadian voices reflected in building our future, where everyone in our community has an equal and fair chance at success, especially as we build back from COVID-19. I want to make sure that we can keep building a better Canada that is healthier and safer for everyone, no matter who you are. Together, I know that we can build a Canada that is healthier, safer, greener, and more competitive.
Thank you, Arielle. The next candidate who will be speaking is Rob Flack for the Conservative Party.
Well, thank you very much, Bronagh. My name is Rob Flack. I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm the CEO of a company called Master Feeds, headquartered right here in London, Ontario. I've worked for many charitable organizations to help grow this city and improve this city, and most recently, I've been the director and chair of the London International Airport. I love London, I love this community, and I want to be your next member of Parliament for London West and hopefully bring a little bit of leadership, experience, and common sense to Ottawa that is so lacking right now with our federal politicians. I've knocked on a lot of doors, thousands of doors, and I'm hearing 2 recurring themes. Number 1, people are fed up with this election. They didn't want it, and they see it as a power grab by Justin Trudeau and a selfish act. Number 2, they're very worried about post-pandemic. It's time for change. It's time for change in Ottawa, and frankly, I think our party has the best recovery plan to go. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rob. Next, we're going to hear from Jacques Boudreau for the Libertarian Party.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. First, I would like to begin by thanking Rogers and the Hall for hosting this and doing the right and decent thing and inviting all parties. Now, libertarianism is a philosophy of personal freedom that is based on the non-aggression principle, which simply states that the initiation or the threat of initiation of force against the innocent is wrong. Now, this principle applies to governments, which is why we strongly oppose There are excessive interventions into our lives. And there's been no better example of government excess than the way they've handled the pandemic. They've racked up an enormous amount of debt that you, the taxpayers, will have to pay for decades to come, as your grandchildren will have as well. I also want to point out that the lockdowns were done without any decent cost-benefit analysis, which should have been done, and the result of which, of course, is that they have done more harm than good. An immediate end to lockdown is part of our platform. Thank you.
Thanks, Jacques. Next, we'll hear from Mike McMullen for the People's Party.
Good morning. My name is Mike McMullen. I'm the PPC London West candidate for my riding. I believe the policies the PPC has identified as being key to restoring trust in government, stimulating a sluggish economy, and returning to the values Canada was founded upon: freedom, fairness, responsibility, and respect. We are a party that consists of many different people from many different backgrounds and from all political stripes. The freedom to have different opinions and share opinions is a good thing. Having civilized conversations about our differences and opinions make us all better people. We at the PPC are prepared to fight for your freedoms, our sovereignty, preserve and protect Canadian values and our history and our traditions, and put the needs of Canadians first. It's time to focus on the needs of Canadians. It's time to put Canadians first. It's time for the People's Party of Canada.
Thanks, Mike. And finally, we'll hear from Shawna Lewkowitz for the New Democratic Party.
Thank you to Rogers and the Aeolian Hall for hosting this event. I'm Shawna Lewkowitz, your NDP candidate. I'm a proud Londoner who has grown up in London West and chosen to raise my family here. I love this community, and it is why I'm running to be your next MP for London West on Jagmeet Singh's team. I am deeply connected to the issues we face and know together that better is possible. As a longtime community leader with over 20 years of experience, I have demonstrated the ability to move important issues forward, change policies, and lead. I've worked in mental health, addictions, and housing, and I currently teach at King's in social justice and peace studies. Having sat on numerous city committees and as the president of the Urban League of London, I've had a hand in strengthening our neighborhoods, local pandemic recovery efforts, and creating a more inclusive city. As we continue to face a pandemic and work on recovery, we know people are struggling and ready for better. We need to elect someone who has the integrity and courage to do what is right for people.
Thanks, Shawna. Now we're going to move on to our portion of our debate where we ask your questions from the community. The first question, we're going to start with Rob Flack. So he was number 2 in the draw, and we're going to work through the order. Rob and all our candidates, what are you personally and your party as a whole going to do to bring civility back to Parliament? Ensuring direct questions get direct answers, not sarcasm, not sound bites, and not whataboutisms. And people, particularly young people, see actual leadership when they watch Question Period. We'll start with Rob.
Thanks, Bronagh. Well, I will begin by saying, since I've been watching Parliament, this question has been asked, and especially Question Period. The decorum at times in our House of Commons is obviously unacceptable. I think the way to improve this, obviously, is to have stricter rules in the House of Commons, but number 2, more free votes that are not dictated by party whips, and obviously with decorum involved. I take a look at what happened last night, even outside of the House of Commons, and what happened with the terrible rock-throwing incident last night. I'm disgusted, but the bottom line is civil liberties need to be protected, but in a respectful and a dignified way, and no way should people be allowed to do that.
Thanks, Rob. Next, we'll go to Jacques for an answer to that question.
Well, the answer to this question lies with the people. I know that you've been told many, many times by different parties that somehow you need our help and things like that. That's not true. You have the power to decide that when a politician refuses to answer a clear question, that you simply will not support this person. And I don't care, again, if you make an excuse because somebody is a member of your party or the party that you support, and you say, well, you know, like he didn't answer, but he's my guy. As long as you keep behaving this way, we're going to have problems. You have to demand of your people, and you have the power to ask that they answer questions properly. If you don't, we'll continue to have this. This is not a question of, someone coming from the top and demanding that they answer a question, although it would be nice if journalists push back. Although I see in this election that they've started to do that. When answers are not given properly, they will simply say, well, that didn't answer my question. Thank you.
Thanks, Jacques, for that answer. And sorry, it's Jacques Boudreau from Libertarian Party. The next person who will answer this question is Mike McMullen for the People's Party.
Thank you very much. We've been dealing with the same three parties, the Conservatives, the Liberals, and the NDPs for 2 decades, and this country's been falling apart under their leadership. The only way to fix this problem is to replace the current political establishment. They have failed us. They said 14 days to flatten the curve. We are 2 years into this now. So it's just failure after failure after failure after failure. And they want to use your suffering, to stand on your back, manipulate you, and let you suffer while they close small business, put millions of people out of work based on just a bunch of hyperbole. And I'm sick and tired of it, and I think it's time we start looking after Canadians. And that's what I'm here for.
Thanks, Mike. Next, we will have Shawna Lewkowitz for the New Democratic Party answer that question.
Thank you. We need to elect leaders who have the integrity and the courage to do what is right and to do it in a respectful way. I work with young people every single day, and I know what they expect of us and the way that they lead. And we need to demonstrate through our actions, through our everyday actions, that we are leaders who can listen to disagreement, who can have respectful conversations, and come out with better policies as a result. That's the way that Parliament should work. Unfortunately, many of our systems are rooted in the same issues that we see in society, issues that are grounded in toxicity and abuse. And so we need to not only elect leaders that are courageous, we need to change policies so the ways that Parliament work actually reflect the desires and the wants of Canadians to get things done. Thank you.
Thanks, Shawna. And finally, we'll hear from Arielle Kayabaga for the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Bronagh, and I want to thank the person who asked this question in our community because I think this is an important question that we need to be asking our leaders. Last night, I was with the Prime Minister when rocks were thrown at him by protesters from a specific party that was present. I think it's important that we watch the language that we use. When we are in a pandemic, one of the things that we need to focus on is how to move Canadians forward. I'm a young woman. I was there with my child, who's 12 years old, who had to witness swearing and rocks being thrown around. This is coming from words that leaders have used to incite people. In this election, what we need to be focusing on is how to fight COVID and how to move Canadians forward. It's been 2 years we've been in this pandemic. The most affected people are young people, women, children, marginalized communities, and those are the things that we need to be focusing on, how we help Canadians get their businesses back, how we help Canadians get back to work, and not use language that divides people. So I hope that we elect those leaders that are going to focus on those things.
Thanks, Arielle. And thanks all candidates for those great answers. We'll move on to our next question, and this question we're going to start with Jacques Boudreau. We received questions, lots of questions on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all over town about housing. How willing are you and your party to look at new out-of-the-box solutions for addressing the needs of unhoused people and those for whom rent is becoming more and more difficult to pay and buying a home seems increasingly impossible? For example, loosening restrictions applicable to tiny homes, repurposing buildings, regulating real estate speculation, and any other ideas? So we'll start with you, Jacques, from the Libertarian Party.
Well, the premise of the question is that we need another top-down approach to solve this problem, which is not the case. There are two elements to this. Number one, we have a Bank of Canada that has maintained interest rates at an artificially low level, which of course increases the price of assets. One of the things that we would do is at the very least ask an audit of the Bank of Canada to see whether we even need it. That's number one. Number two, this is a supply and demand problem. And we have an inadequate amount of supply, which if you trace it back, you will find that it's and if you talk to developers, they will tell you that we have an enormous amount of red tape, bureaucracy, rules and regulations that make it very difficult for a proper supply to be enacted. So again, trace it back to your local governments often and tell them to get on with it. Thank you.
Thanks, Jacques. Now we'll ask that same question of Mike McMullen from the People's Party.
Yeah, I get, we have a lot of young people that support the People's Party, and I get this question quite often. How are these young people going to be able to afford, $500,000 homes when they try to get into the market? And we know there's a problem with CMHC and the way that they are assessing the homes. But our policy is not to, unlike the NDP or the Liberals, promise everybody free stuff. Our policy is to try to reduce the inflation so that people can get on their feet, bring jobs back to London West, lower the taxes, the small business tax, and get people back to work. We think that, and I'm sure everybody can see it when they go to the grocery store, inflation, everything's doubling in cost. So that compounded with a carbon tax, which is now driving up the costs all over the place. In the grocery stores and in transportations and everything like that. So we want an approach that's going to put, start looking at putting Canadians first. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Next, we'll ask that question of Shawna Lewkowitz for the New Democratic Party.
Thank you. So this is probably one of the #1 issues I hear at the door, regardless of the neighborhood that I'm in London West. It is very apparent that people are concerned about housing here in London. Housing is a human right, and everyone deserves a safe house over their head. Unfortunately, since the last election, the housing crisis has only worsened. Rents have skyrocketed. It's become almost impossible to afford a home. So we do need creative solutions to address the housing crisis, along with boosting supply. Which the NDP would do. We would build 500,000 affordable housing units across the country starting now. But we would also look at those creative solutions, things like making it easier for people to co-own a house who, may not live in the same family, maybe friends or distant relatives. We want to look at co-housing opportunities, particularly for seniors, so that they can live in place and, have a roof over their heads as they age.
Thanks, Shawna. Next, we'll ask that same question of Arielle Kayabaga for the Liberal Party.
Yeah, I think this question is great, especially in this time that we're in, and talking about how young people have had a hard time accessing housing. It's also important to understand the different things that has caused this housing disparity. I have knocked on so many doors where parents are asking me to take their children out of their basement, and that's the situation that many people of my generation are experiencing right now. Housing rents have gone up because housing rent regulation has been removed by the Conservative government, provincial government. There's more incentives in condos versus renting. What we need to talk about is what the national housing strategy that has helped London specifically. Over 530,000 families will have lifted out of homelessness with the national housing strategy over the next decade. And also it's important to talk about how young Canadians can have now access to buying a home with the investment that the government is putting in and removing closures for them to be able to own a home, and also helping them dream and be able to access that home and protecting their rights as home buyers.
Thanks, Arielle. And finally, we'll ask that same question of Rob Flack for the Conservative Party.
Thank you very much. We've knocked on lots of doors, and my heart breaks when I see these young children hanging onto their parents' legs and looking, who's this crazy guy at the door? And I say, I hope your kids can afford a house someday. And it does break my heart because I see this, and it's sad because inflation is running rampant. We don't have enough supply. I agree with Jacques. We need a better supply situation here in London. But the Conservative Party, under our recovery plan, is going to do a few things. Number one, there's 37,000 federal buildings throughout this country. We're going to release 15% of them that are unpurposed, and we're going to convert them to affordable housing in downtown sectors. We're also going to work closely with the municipalities to ensure at all times the regulations are reduced so we can get these homes built and built quickly.
That's only 20 minutes into our debate, and we already had somebody agree with somebody, so I feel that's a positive. Our next question, so thank you for that response, Rob. Our next question comes from a community not-for-profit organization. Research has shown that music is beneficial to our positive mental health and well-being, and plays a vital role in our community. Music in our community has been hit hard by the pandemic. There's been a lack of guidance and an unwillingness to support music in our community in the same way that we've seen in sports. If we can find a way to ensure that our children in particular have access to sports during the pandemic, why have we not also supported music and the arts for children who feel connected to their community through the arts? We will start with Mike McMullen for the People's Party.
That's a great question. Actually, my campaign manager, Claire, right in front of us here, she's heavily involved in the arts and community. So, I think that, increasing those things in music and bands and musicians and providing maybe some help to get that stuff going in our city, I think that would be absolutely wonderful, and I think that would be great. I think it'd be an awesome endeavor for London West. And I think I'd be right into that. So thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Next, we'll hear from Shawna Lewkowitz for the New Democratic Party.
Yes, that's a great question. And arts and culture are at the heart of who we are as Canadians. And London moving towards being a music city, and the vibrant arts culture that we have here is one of our community's greatest strengths. We also know that during the pandemic, the arts and music culture were particularly hard hit as places had to close down and artists weren't able to work. And so we want to invest back in the arts, both in our community and across Canada, by providing long-term stable funding to arts and culture so that artists and organizations know where their funding is coming from. We also want to make it easier for artists to leverage their income tax to make life more affordable. It is hard to make a go as an artist in any community, and we want to make it easier for people to survive. And we also want to invest in Indigenous theater, music, and arts, recognizing that this is a really important part of our arts and cultural scene. Thank you.
Thanks, Shawna. Next, we'll hear from Arielle Kayabaga for the Liberal Party.
Thank you. We know that arts and culture draw people together. And as others have mentioned, arts and culture is something that is very vibrant in our city. And our government has continued to support the arts culture even through the pandemic. And fighting COVID and moving forward and moving Canadians forward is also part of helping the arts and the culture. We need to continue to fight and finish this COVID fight. We need to get Canadians back to work. A few days ago, I met a young woman who is running a small business company in the arts sector. And she asked me what we're going to do in terms of vaccinating people so that she can protect her employees, so that she can protect her customers. And she wants us to move forward. She doesn't want to talk about, sitting at home and receiving support. She's a young woman who wants to move her business forward. So this is why our government has a plan that's a costed plan that can help Canadians get back to normal life and support arts and culture and diverse and inclusive arts and culture. Thank you.
Thanks, Arielle. Now we'll get the perspective of Rob Flack, Conservative.
Well, my perspective is unique, I think, here, because I've been in this facility many, many times at Aeolian Hall. My wife is a member of the musical band Leahy, and my daughter is also a musician. And yes, during this COVID crisis, they've literally been rendered at home. No shows, no performances. The good news is I've got to see them a lot more, but the tough news is they've not got to do their trade, not got to perform on a regular basis. If we had a faster rollout for vaccines, we might be sitting in audiences in this hall more effectively now, and I think going forward, we have to make sure we block this fourth wave that's upon us to ensure that we can get the arts going again. Music in particular is a big part of our life, and I support anything we can do to get my wife and daughter back on stage. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. And finally, we'll hear from Jacques Boudreau from the Libertarian Party.
Thank you. This is a broader question. In my opening statement, I talked about how the lockdown was decided without a proper cost-benefit analysis. And the costs were enormous among hundreds of different aspects of society, including music, theater, the list goes on. And of course, because they didn't do it, they decided the lockdown was a good idea. It wasn't. As I said, the evidence now is very clear that it has done more harm than good. So, of course, the damage is done now, but an immediate end to lockdown to allow the performing arts to start again would be the solution. So it was a very, very poor decision made in the first place, something that should never be done. I mean, cost-benefit analysis is the way to decide on things, not one-sided analysis. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Jacques, and that's a great lead into my next question because it's actually two questions, and this is one of the more contentious issues, obviously, that we're going to be dealing with in this election period. So I'm going to give you two questions from two different commenters on our Facebook page. I have a question for all campaigns, and I'm a bit disappointed. Why have you not insisted on all campaign workers and volunteers being double vaxxed and committed publicly to it? You're going to have to lead this country out of this pandemic, and you can't even set the example yourselves. Surely public safety should come ahead of politics. Part two, ask them if they will get rid of all vaccine mandates, as they are a gross violation of our civil rights. Tell them that there are a significant number of people who are basing their vote on this point almost exclusively. We will start with Shawna Lewkowitz, New Democratic Party.
Okay. We all want to come out of COVID-19. We all want this pandemic to end, and the only way for it to end is for vaccinations to be part of a greater public health strategy. Our campaign has committed to all of our volunteers who are public-facing being vaccinated. Our leader, Jagmeet Singh, came out right from the beginning and said that all of our candidates and MPs would be double vaccinated and are double vaccinated. In our office, we have COVID protocols in place, contact tracing, screening, and we wear masks when we go to the door. We step back, and we are very respectful of, the fact that people have different comfort levels with COVID and, us being out there. We didn't want an election during a pandemic. It's irresponsible to call one when we're in the middle of a fourth wave, but here we are, and we're out there doing it as safely as possible and making sure that we're keeping our community safe.
Thanks for that response, Shawna. Next, we'll hear from Arielle Kayabaga, Liberal Party.
Yeah, thank you for this question. It's really simple for me. Last night when I was canvassing, I talked to a couple of parents who were preparing to send their kids off to school this morning. I took my son to school this morning, and I was really excited to see him get back into school, but also a little nervous knowing that our little ones have not had the opportunity to get vaccinated. I think that vaccinating people is the only way we're going to be able to fight this COVID-19. It's important that we vaccinate because we know that vaccinations have saved lives. There is no discussion around it. We need to protect Canadians, we need to protect our children, and this is the only way we're going to move Canadians forward.
Thanks, Arielle. Next, we'll hear from Rob Flack, Conservative Party.
Thank you. Well, our party, our leader, and I say to everyone, please get vaccinated. Get vaccinated. It makes sense, it's common sense. But for those that can't because of health considerations, or those that won't because they're unsure or afraid or not sure of the consequences, while I don't like it, I respect their civil liberty and freedom to make that choice. What we do suggest is if you want to come into a venue, make sure that you have a rapid test or you've been proven that you don't have COVID, mask up, and away we go. It's simple as that. There's civil liberties to protect here, but we do suggest everybody get vaccinated.
Thanks, Rob. Next, we'll hear from Jacques Boudreau from the Libertarian Party.
Most of what we've heard so far, once again, is a top-down authoritarian approach. Of course, we don't support mandates. However, I will make the following statement, which is important because, again, most of the parties here today do not respect private property rights. And I want to say that a hall such as this one could set whatever demand that they wanted. It is their right, it is their building. However, the government has no business starting to get involved in the affairs of this hall with its patrons. And if we were to do this, you would find that the free market very quickly would accommodate everybody. Some of them would be restrictive, others would not. It would materialize very, very quickly, and it's the way forward. It's this obsession that other parties have with a one-size-fits-all. We are all different. It doesn't work. Thank you.
Thanks, Jacques. And finally, Mike McMullen for the People's Party.
Yeah, as you can see, the NDPs, the Liberals, and the Conservatives basically are all identical. They're all the same. We respect your civil liberties, your freedoms, and your rights to make your own medical choices. And it should not be a top-down theocracy is what they have, right? Because we know what happens if they disagree, or if Arielle disagrees with Justin Trudeau, she'll be fired. We know what happens with the Conservative Party if you disagree with Aaron O'Toole. He will dismiss you. This is not a democracy that we're living in here, guys. Everybody needs to wake up and realize this. I am here to stand up for your freedoms and your rights and not to force anybody to do anything. Interestingly enough, this morning I talked to my neighbor and he received the vaccine and he was in emergency for a week because of it, because he had his heart inflamed. Now, that's pretty serious stuff. And I think some of the people would rather take their chances with COVID than to be medically injured by a vaccine.
Would any of the candidates who were mentioned there, or your party mentioned there, like a rebuttal for that?
Sure.
Okay, so this is Rob Flack, Conservative. 30 seconds.
While I respect your opinion, Mike, I don't agree with it. We are an open and inclusive party. Bottom line is, I don't like when you explain to other candidates, tell us that we're going to be kicked out. Not the case at all. We're open to have free and open debate in our party. Always has been, always will be. Full stop.
Whatever.
All right, and with that, we'll move on. Would you like a rebuttal? All right, so with that, we'll move on to our next question from a London West resident. I would like to know why the federal government has left people with disabilities out of all pandemic financial relief payments. People with disabilities in receipt of federal monthly payments, or CPP disability, must pay their doctors to complete forms to prove they are severe and prolonged disabled. It often takes more than one application before a disabled person is approved for these small monthly payments of approximately $1,000 a month. No one can live on $1,000 a month and eat, pay for housing, and pay for medicine. Disabled people cannot wait for the government to complete a 3-year survey to see how to best serve disabled Canadians. Arielle Kayabaga for the Liberal Party.
I want to start by saying that, first of all, it's important to support every Canadian who needs the most support. This pandemic has showed us, has shown the cracks in our system, and we need to do better. And as an elected MP, I will work hard to make sure that everybody's voices are being represented and that this issue is being resolved, and that it's also important to talk about the things that have affected Canadians and their voices are not being represented at the table. So I want to be your voice to be able to fight for things like people who are on the margins, to be able to fight for them and make sure that they're represented and they're receiving their supports. Thank you.
Thanks, Arielle. Next, we'll hear from Rob Flack, Conservative.
Canada's recovery plan deals with this specific issue, and yes, it is a travesty that these people are not being given enough money in times of trouble like this. Our recovery plan to secure the future calls on doubling what disability folks are getting. Read it, it's in our document. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rob. Next, Jacques Boudreau, Libertarian.
Thank you. Well, to answer the question directly, is I cannot answer why the federal government messed up, although given that the entire response through this has been an unmitigated disaster, it is not surprising. Now, having said that, from a libertarian point of view, taxes would be hugely decreased, and the support to help each other, to help people who in need, would be done at the local level, and it would be done through a variety of means. I would encourage anybody to look at the history of mutual aid societies that were done at the neighborhood level, and they worked really well. In fact, they worked far, far better than the government. If you think for a minute that, say, $100 to go and help somebody, collected by the government in taxes, that $100 makes its way to people who need help, think again. It doesn't happen. Thank you.
Thanks for that answer, Jacques. Next, we'll hear from Mike McMullen, the People's Party candidate.
Well, it's interesting, the same parties that have caused the failure in our healthcare system are here to tell you today that they're going to fix it. I mean, think about it. You cannot trust the people that caused the problem to fix the problem. They've been promising to fix it every year, and again, buying you off with your money. And I am sick and tired of this. I mean, the Liberal government has done nothing. They created this crisis. 14 days to flatten the curve. Where are we at? 2 years later. I mean, Justin Trudeau has so many scandals right now. I don't know what's more important to him, covering his scandals by calling an election or actually helping Canadians.
And thank you for that, Mike. We'll move on to Shawna Lewkowitz, NDP.
I've heard from people with disabilities throughout this campaign and before that unfortunately they feel let down and left behind by this government. Nobody should be expected to live on as little as they are. The emergency response benefit that the NDP fought for $2,000, we fought to have people with disabilities included. We would bring in a guaranteed basic income so that nobody would live with less than $2,000. We would start with people with disabilities because we know that nobody can afford to put a roof over their head, food on the table at the amounts that people are expected to live on right now. We would also bring in pharmacare, which would allow people to access the medications that they need, the life-saving medications that they rely on every day, and not have to make the choice between putting food on their table and the medications that they need.
Thanks for those answers, everybody. We'll move on to our next question, which came to us on Facebook. How will you help implement the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action on education? So these are items 6 through 12, which include calls for a strategy to eliminate gaps between educational spending for on and off reserve Indigenous children, reporting on educational and income attainment for Indigenous and non-Indigenous people in Canada, support for Indigenous language learning, and other commitments. An Assembly of First Nations analysis released in June 2020 found a $627 million capital deficit in the immediate category for additions to existing schools alone. We'll start with Rob Flack for the Conservative Party.
Thank you. Our Indigenous people are paramount to the success of Canada and have been an important part of this great country forever. I want to point out that my big concern here is potable drinking water, first of all. While I think education is absolutely important, why can we not fix this problem on the reservations throughout Canada? I just don't get it. It transcends party boundaries. We need to get that fixed first and foremost. Education is paramount in any society, and I will say this, read the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It is well documented. There's suggestions and representations in there for us to follow, and we support many of these initiatives as long as we can continue down the road of supporting our folks with getting potable, good, safe drinking water.
Thanks, Rob. Next, we'll hear from Jacques Boudreau, Libertarian.
The question, once again, has a premise that seems to feed this idea that we need the federal government to be involved, which further reinforces the idea that we need this paternalistic entity, which has been the problem from the get-go anyway. Among other things, the federal government has stalled the land claim process. Often it takes more than a decade before it gets resolved, and I suspect it's being done for the purpose of trying to make sure that the plaintiff runs out of money, which is a despicable, morally repugnant element to do. The idea of the Libertarian Party is that once the land claim has been arrived, that the reserves would have rights pretty much equal to that of a province, and then they could look after their own affair instead of looking up again to the nanny state. Thank you.
Thanks, Jacques. Next, we'll hear from Mike McMullen, People's Party.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with Rob and Jacques on this situation. Trudeau seems to be too busy taking the Aboriginal community to court, and too busy sending Canadian tax dollars overseas to build roads in Saudi Arabia. I mean, this is ridiculous. Justin Trudeau has been in power for what? How long is it now? 6 years? Too long. And he has done nothing for these people. He is just a manipulator, and his MPs in the field are nothing but puppets.
Thanks for that answer, Mike. Next, we'll move on to Shawna Lewkowitz, NDP.
Indigenous rights are at the core of our commitments as New Democrats. We are committed to true nation-to-nation partnerships, true reconciliation and justice. And we know that Indigenous services have been underfunded for years. As my colleagues here on stage have pointed out, you know, Justin Trudeau keeps making promises around clean drinking water, and the timeline just keeps being extended. That needs to be a priority now and not into the future, and that is what we as New Democrats commit to. As far as education goes, education on First Nation reserves is vastly underfunded. It is part of the TRC recommendation. It is one of the many commitments, all of the commitments that the New Democrats would follow through on in terms of truth and reconciliation, murdered and missing Indigenous women's calls to action, and the full implementation of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People.
Thanks, Shawna. And next we'll go to Arielle Kayabaga, Liberal Party.
Thank you. Reconciliation is a long journey, one that all Canadians on all levels of government have to take and commit to. I equally share the same frustration that a lot of work has to be done. Our government has already committed to all calls of the 94 calls to truth and reconciliation. The government has continued to work with the Indigenous communities. I also believe that this has to be Indigenous-led. As an elected official, I will continue to work to end all calls to work and resolve all 94 calls to the TRC. And over 60 of the 94 calls to action are actively in progress right now, and we'll continue to make sure that the water advisory boards as well are ended in a timely manner. Thank you.
Thanks, Arielle. We can move on to our next question now, which is, a few months ago, leaders of Canada's federal political parties converged on London to pay their respects following a heinous act of terrorism which occurred in our community. Commitments were made to stamp out hate in our country. What have you and your party done since then? What concrete progress has been made? We'll start with Jacques Boudreau, Libertarian.
Thank you. As stated in my opening statement, we are based on the non-aggression principle, and I've stated what that means. Now, this is something that is completely ignored by governments repeatedly, where they think that, well, it sort of applies to you, but when it comes to the government, it doesn't. The government in this country has such a poor track record of having rules, regulations, laws that enable the carrying out of racist acts without impunity. So the first thing we need to do is to drill into the head of people that the non-aggression principle should be abided by everyone, including the government. And that will go a long way, I think. But don't kid yourself. We've gone through a Holocaust where there are, well, unfortunately, I will not be able to finish, but let's start with an application of the non-aggression principle and apply it to the government.
Thanks, Jacques. Next, we'll go to Mike McMullen, People's Party.
Yeah, when I found out about that, it's an absolute tragedy what happened. People lost their lives needlessly. I've done some research into it to try to figure out exactly what happened. I have heard lots of different things and read different things. They had spoken to his co-workers, and there is no, other than the fact that he had mental illness, there was no indication that he was a supremacist or whatever you're talking about. As we find out more about it, we need to continue to look at it and continue to try to understand what happened there. Again, it's a terrible tragedy, but I'm not sure at this point that it was an act of terrorism.
Thanks, Mike. Next, we'll hear from Shawna Lewkowitz, NDP.
First of all, I'm really disappointed to hear Mike McMullen, the PPC candidate, undermine the notion that this was terrorism in our community. It was a devastating act of terror that, led to the loss of a beautiful family, created fear and insecurity throughout our community. On the plus side, we saw people come together. We saw Londoners join together and stand against hate. As New Democrats and as our leader Jagmeet Singh, we are committed to following through on the recommendations that came out on the National Summit on Islamophobia, and we are committed to acting by creating a national plan to dismantle far-right extremist and white supremacy groups. We want to adopt national standards for identifying and reporting hate crimes. We want to counter online hate and hold social media platforms accountable for the hateful content that is spread on their platforms. We need action, not just talk.
Thanks, Shawna. Next, we'll ask that same question of Arielle Kayabaga for the Liberal Party.
I echo the same sentiment that it is unacceptable to not call out what this really was. It was an act of terrorism, and it is an act that came out of years of divisive language from our leaders. Islamophobia is not acceptable in our country, and our government has passed a bill to condemn Islamophobia in our country. We will continue to do so. I've spoken to many young women in our community in London West who are Muslim, who have felt unsafe to be out, and that's unacceptable. We need to go back to a safe Canada. I fled a war in Burundi not to continue to live a war in this country, and I will fight for the freedom and the safety of our citizens. Thank you.
Thanks, Arielle. Next, we'll hear from Rob Flack, Conservative.
Thank you. I was there on that hot June night for the vigil in London. I know others here were there as well. It was moving. It was sad. It was a heinous, heinous crime and unacceptable completely as an act of terror. Hate and especially any forthcoming version of discrimination is wrong in Canada. It always has been and it always needs to be. Full stop.
Thanks for that concise answer, Rob, and thank you for all those answers, candidates. This has been a really fantastic, respectful debate, and you've been really answering the questions directly, which is what I really like. We have only a little bit of time left, so now I'm going to give each of the candidates 1 minute to make a closing statement. We're going to go in reverse order, so that means we're going to be starting out with Shawna Lewkowitz for the New Democratic Party.
Thank you. New Democrats are different. We aren't in it for power. We are in it for you. We know that good jobs that treat people fairly make a real difference to Canadian families, and that setting Canadians up for success in the work world of the future benefits us all. New ways of thinking can shape the recovery from the COVID-19 crisis and help make our economy fairer and deliver the results that we all want. What we have seen over the last 6 years is a Liberal Prime Minister who loves to say the right things, but doesn't follow through to address the issues that matter most to Canadians. We can make life more affordable. We can build an economy that works better for more people. We can address the climate crisis and have climate justice. We can undertake the important work of reconciliation in good faith and in true and equal partnership with Indigenous communities across the country. I am a fighter and a leader, and I've been on the ground working on behalf of Londoners for many years. I'm ready to take this fight to Ottawa to ensure that you have someone who is on your side. Thank you very much.
Next, we'll hear from Mike McMullen, People's Party candidate, with his closing statement.
I just want to say that the current Liberal Conservative Party is just a boutique party of fake outrage while they try to promote their globalist agenda. At the same time, Justin Trudeau's lining his pockets. Aaron O'Toole and Justin Trudeau are pretty much the same party. They're trying to convince you they're not, but they are. They have the same policies and the same agenda. And I kind of laughed when you said no Conservatives were kicked out of the party. What about Rob Nichols and Chatham? At the People's Party of Canada, we've had enough. Our movement right now is the biggest threat to this establishment and the biggest hope for Canadian citizens. We are at a crossroads right now of who we are as a nation and who the corrupt Canadian establishment wants us to be. With the People's Party of Canada, we have a real opportunity to take our country back, led by Canadians who care for this country and people that will put Canadians first. I am prepared to fight for your freedoms, our sovereignty, and preserve and protect Canadian values. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike. Next, we'll hear from Jacques Boudreau, the Libertarian Party candidate.
Thank you. Let me address something that shockingly has not been mentioned at all today. and it's the state of the fiscal health of this country, which is very poor. Between the debt and the unfunded liabilities, we're looking at about $5.1 trillion, which means that when you hear, for example, the NDP talking about a pharmacare, and I had brought that up to them 2 years ago, was completely ignored. These are promises that cannot be fulfilled. It's as simple as that. You are being conned, okay? Same thing with the Liberals. Anybody who tells you that we can have more free stuff, it's not going to happen. We have a very, very significant problem that needs to be addressed. And it appears that the only party that's aware of this problem is the Libertarian Party of Canada. So if you want that taken care of, please vote Libertarian. Thank you.
Thanks, Jacques. Next, we'll hear from Rob Flack for the Conservative Party.
Thank you very much. There's a clear choice in this election. Canada's recovery plan, it's documented, it's detailed, it puts a way forth post-pandemic versus the Liberal plan that, as Jacques just said, details more spending, more deficits, mortgaging the future of our children and generations to come. The choice is clear. I offer you leadership, experience, and common sense. Let's help secure the future of London West and get Canada back on track.
Thanks, Rob. And finally, we'll hear from Arielle Kayabaga for the Liberal Party.
Thank you. When I hear those comments, it reaffirms why I'm running. As a young Canadian woman who's a working mom, this election, what's at stake is high for us. We need to be represented. Our voices need to be heard. This pandemic has affected more young Canadians, women, children, people who live on the margins. You can trust that I will be your strongest voice. I will listen and make sure that your voices are being represented in Ottawa. I have the experience and the track record to make real and meaningful change happen, and most importantly, this is our election. This is our generation that has to step up and be represented in making decisions that will affect us for the next 20, 30 to 50 years. Thank you.
Thanks, and thank you for all those great answers to the questions, your closing and opening statements. So, Jacques, Rob, Arielle, Mike, and Shawna, good luck in the next 2 weeks as you continue campaigning. We'd like to extend thank you to the Aeolian Hall and Clark Bryan for putting on this debate to help our neighbors make informed choices when they exercise their right to vote. We'd also like to take this opportunity to encourage all our viewers to get out and vote in one of the many accessible advance polls or on September 20th. And to remind you to watch the local results on Rogers Television, September 20th at 9:30 p.m. We have assembled a panel of experts to provide analysis of the results as they come in. I hope you can join us. My name is Bronagh Morgan. Thank you so much for being here.